Hello, welcome back to Luna Rosa Ranch. My name's Emily Pethel, and I'm excited to talk to you today about something near and dear to my heart, and that is our responsibility as teachers with our horse. So we have all heard the term, I'm sure, of don't blame the horse for things. Sometimes it is easier to say than live by. It's hard to live out our actions and have that character all the time. I'm certainly not perfect. I'm not claiming to be. But I want to talk a little bit more about our responsibility to present problems to our horse that they are capable of achieving, breaking down those things into little steps that makes them feel like a winner, right? So whenever a child goes through a learning situation that they struggle with, say like I sucked at math. So say that you have a kid that's just not doing well in math class and just isn't understanding what that teacher is trying to say. So what happens in that situation? Maybe the blame gets placed on the child. It could happen. Hopefully a teacher doesn't do that, but they could say, well, the child's just disobedient, or they are don't care, or they're being defiant, or they're maybe a little bit slow, or all those other things. And instead of thinking through like how we might approach it differently, or maybe there's a tutor that might have a different approach that works for them. And I think that says a lot more about the instructor than it does about the child, right? So maybe it's a little bit of a hurt to their ego to maybe outsource to another tutor, like, how dare you not understand the way I taught it because I taught it perfectly. It might be something in there with the ego that's damaged by that. Or maybe they're just not willing to change. Maybe they have some stereotype that they've formulated, which is not limited to people. People have stereotypes about animals as well. So you hear them in the dog world, the horse world. You hear them placed on Arabians, like, oh, well, he'll never be calm because he's an Arabian. Or put in any other stereotype you wish there. But it's a common thing to happen. So it is still our responsibility to make sure that we're keeping those expectations in a positive way about what our horse is capable of. There have been awesome studies that have been done on learning behavior in the human world, and I won't get super deep into them. I can post some below if you'd like, but one of the main ones that I'm thinking of is they had a control group of students that all had the same IQ. They gave a group to one teacher and said, oh, you have gifted students. These students are really, really smart. And then they gave a group of students to another teacher and said, your students are a little bit slow, like they aren't quite up to the learning standards, or however they put it. And the students performed to the expectations of their teacher, regardless of their IQ. Their IQ was all the same. So the ones that had students they told were gifted did super well. The ones that had students they told were slow or stupid did not as well, to a degree that was repeatable and was valid in the research. So your expectations have a huge part to play in what's going to happen with your relationship with your horse. If you have expectations that are poor, you need to work on how you perceive your horse and what situation you're in, or the horse that you're working with. So keep that in mind. So a great way to think about, well, how do I make things into manageable chunks? Because a lot of things we do in the day with our horse, we kind of take for granted. A lot of things we do in the day, even in our own lives, we take for granted, like getting up, getting dressed, going to the car. All those things are little steps that might be challenging for someone that has a learning disability, for instance. So if we think about breaking down everything we do into little steps with our horse and what good looks like for that, it can really help us. So the video game industry does a great job of breaking things down into little steps. I think it's a great example when we're talking about learning and learning theory. So in video games, level 1, you're learning how to use the controller, you're learning how to move the guy around, and they plot the script so that you are in a safe environment to learn all those things, and you don't move up to a level before you have the prerequisite skills to be able to succeed. They never just dump you right in level 28 when you're at a level 4, right? You have to build the skills and prove you can make it to get to the end of the game. And generally, there's milestone portions in those video games as well, like a boss level, if you will. So I'm thinking of Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot had, and I don't know if I'm dating myself with that, it's just one of my favorites growing up. So there was like 5 levels initially, and then there was a boss at the end of those 5 levels. And I know for that game particularly, you could pick whichever level you wanted to do in any order. So you could start with level 3 and then play level 2 and then play level 5 and play level 1. But you had to complete all the levels 1 through 5 and complete the big boss of that group before you could move on to level 6. So that's one way we might think about it with our horses, is that if we're breaking things down into steps, you don't necessarily have to stay in a certain order with those prerequisite steps. If you get stuck on something, maybe move into something else and try that for a little while and then come back to the other one. And maybe with that skill set you built in the other one, maybe this one's easier now, for example. So what would be an example of breaking things down into the tiniest step? So one milestone in and of itself is just catching your horse, right? Especially for a wild horse, that can be a huge milestone. So breaking that down into little chunks could be, does my horse accept me sitting outside their pen in a lawn chair, for instance, without getting upset and worried? Maybe that's one step. Maybe the next step is they accept me sitting inside their pen in a lawn chair without any expectations of them, without getting upset and worried, and then so on and so forth until you put the halter. And then another set of milestones might be, can I catch my horse, lead them into the barn, and put them in the cross ties and groom them quietly with no incidents? So that might be the next goal, for instance. And there's a lot of different things that have to go into that, right? So we've caught our horse, say that's good, we're past that milestone. Now the first step in that might be, can I get my horse through the gate and shut the gate behind me without any incidents? So you have to think in your mind, what would that look like if it went poorly? What would that look like if it went okay? And what would that look like if it was perfect? So if it went okay, maybe my horse wasn't really yielding to the gate as I pulled it back. I had to kind of pull on them and tug them back and make them get out of my way. And then they got through the gate and they were had their head up and were a little bit hard to deal with. And then I had to get them to move their hindquarters over, and then I got the gate barely shut. That might be we got it done, but it didn't look great. Then there might be, perfect might be, we opened the gate, the horse was light in my hand, and he moved just off of a feel away from the gate as I pulled the gate back, and all those little individual steps, and just have in your mind what a perfect thing would look like to get it done. Then you get through the gate. Maybe that's one criterion. Then the next criterion might be the walk from the gate to the barn itself. And you could have poor for that might be my horse was rearing and he was kicking and striking out and was being a hot mess. And then kind of getting it done, a kind of a good might have been, we got inside, but he was dragging me a little bit, he was rushing, and then he was whinnying to his friends and he wasn't listening to me and his head was up high and he was just checked out, but we walked into the gate, no big deal. Or we walked into the barn, no big deal. So that might be we got it done, but it wasn't great. And then perfect might be, he was right by my side. He was listening to me. He had an ear on me whenever I added a little bit of pressure to the lead rope. Anytime that I sped up, he sped up. Anytime I stopped, he stopped. And he was right there with me. We were having a conversation the whole time. That might be what your perfect is. And then so on and so forth, getting into the cross ties and hooking up the cross ties and moving on. So you don't have to demand perfection the first time through the video game. Maybe just good enough is good for that point. But a lot of people that play video games will go back and then fix things that they may not have gotten the first time. So maybe you play a game the whole way through on easy or medium, and you love the game, so you come back and you play it through the next time on hard or on a challenging, whatever word they use, legendary, heroic. You play it on the hardest level. So that's kind of the view of a black belt going back through their course of instruction and redoing all the basics with a black belt's eyes. So you can think about that. The reason why it's important to be focused on the quality of what you do with your horse on these little steps is because everything is related. So if there's anxiety in those steps, there's going to be anxiety with the riding. A lot of times you'll hear someone say oh, my horse just bucked and blew up and he just has a running problem and a rearing problem and all these things happen and they just happen out of nowhere. You can never see it coming. It just happens. And then you peel back the onion a few layers and it's I had to have two people hold him at the mounting block for me to get on. And then, once I got on, I had to keep a death grip on the reins. And you back up from that, and you're like, well, he was prancing around on the bridle while I walked him from the barn to the arena. And then you back up a little bit from that, and you're like, well, in the cross ties, he was pawing, and he wouldn't stand still, and he had anxiety, and his head was in the air, and he didn't like being groomed, and he reached around and tried to bite me when I put the girth on. And then you back up from that, and you hear, oh, well, he didn't want to stay with me while I was walking him in from the paddock, and, he was rushing a little bit, and the wind blew up a plastic bag, and he lost his mind. And you're like, well, that, it sounds like there was anxiety at all those different levels before the accident or explosion happened. So it didn't come out of nowhere. So if you can notice, be present enough in your day to understand what your horse is telling you when they're upset, you can fix stuff before it becomes a problem. And when you do that, you're going to be set up for success. So it's really a little bit about being more in tune with your horse, setting them up for success, make them feel like a winner, and making sure that you're breaking things down into chunks. Because what happens if you don't, right? So if you don't, like I have adult learners in what I do now, I teach naval warfare, and I have to teach them really hard stuff. I mean, they get pushed into some really challenging situations. There could be the chance for a lot of anxiety at the end. It's very stressful. And if you push them too far, too fast, what happens, right? Like if they get into a scenario where they aren't comfortable, they get frustrated. And at worst, like they may not even know what to do next. Like they may get so overwhelmed and frustrated where they're just like, I don't even know what buttons to push because I just literally am just overwhelmed and frustrated. And if you as the instructor aren't able to kind of regroup, let's think about this again, let's break this down into a chunk for you that makes sense for you and try to build on this. If you aren't able to do that, the frustration just builds. And eventually it breaks down their confidence. I mean, you've probably failed at something and it doesn't feel good. I mean, I know I failed at a few things, and in fact, two of them are some of my strongest memories. I mean, we do not like to fail at stuff. And I assure you, your horse doesn't want to fail at things either. So the more you can set them up for success, each time you set them up for something they can do, builds their confidence. Each time you set them up in a way for something that they cannot do for you, it erodes their confidence. And it's as simple as that, and it's your responsibility. So before you go out in the barn and do your next task, take a few moments. Think about, what do I want to accomplish today? What are the steps to do that? And then try to get it done. Think about what would really good look like. And then if you get stuck, don't be afraid to reach out for help. There's tons of resources out there that can help you. There's video resources out there. You can find a trusted trainer online that teaches with your same ethics, and you can really get some cool stuff accomplished with your horse. And it's going to improve your presence and your horse's relationship with you. So thank you for listening. I also am going to bring up a cool book on the subject called Don't Shoot the Dog, which is a lot like Don't Blame the Horse. And it's a behaviorist named Karen Pryor. She's awesome. The subtitle here is The Art of Teaching and Training, The Secrets to Changing Behavior in Pets, Kids, and Yourself. And I assure you it works for adults, children, horses, dogs, cats, maybe not your fish, not sure, but all animals understand behavior and learning in very much the same way. And it is a really cool book. And next week I'm going to go through some of my favorite pointers in there and talk with it about you guys too. Awesome. Have a great day, everyone.